A young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
Escalating hostilities across Asia and the Middle East are pushing an already fragile humanitarian situation to the brink. In Lebanon alone, more than 1 million people, 1 in every 5 residents, have fled their homes. Bridges, roads, hospitals, the infrastructure that remains is under immense strain. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Even in displacement, the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR, says that many still do not feel safe. Airstrikes have landed dangerously close to civilian shelters, and the psychological toll, especially on children, who make up more than a third of those displaced, is likely to endure long after the fighting stops. So what can be done at this point when needs are rising faster than resources? And how does the UNHCR keep an humanitarian system running when the conflict continues to expand? At this hour, we're very honored to have with us Ms. Karolina Lindholm Billing, the representative for the UNHCR in Lebanon. Now, Representative Billing, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks for all the efforts of you and your colleagues. We understand that UNHCR reported on March the 12th that between 600,000 and 1 million Iranian households, representing more than 3 million people, are now temporarily displaced inside Iran. You're working in Lebanon, of course, but events across the Middle East do have connections and links. How do you assess the current situation on the ground?
I mean, inside Lebanon, which, as you say, is linked to the events in the broader region, inside Lebanon, it's very, very concerning, the developments. As you mentioned, more than 1 million civilians have fled from their homes within just a few weeks' time, and quite large areas are now under regular attack or evacuation orders. Last night, just the Israeli Defense Forces announced evacuation of 6 villages in western Bekaa in the east of Lebanon, which is further triggering displacement now from this area. And the people who are fleeing, who we are working for and with, they flee without anything because most are terrified about being caught up in these attacks. So especially during the first week of this escalating conflict, the roads from South Lebanon towards Beirut and further north were completely jammed with cars of people trying to escape from the attacks and get to safer places. Most have arrived without anything. Some, I even met, people who were still in the same pajamas they had fled with because they didn't even make time to change clothes or pack anything before they got into their cars. So this humanitarian situation is very dire because people are arriving basically without nothing and also very traumatized.
So what is UNHCR doing at this moment in Lebanon in terms of, relief to those in need?
So the Lebanese government has from the start led the emergency response effort, which is very important, but their capacities and resources are very strained, especially after years of deep economic crisis. So they rely on international partners like UNHCR. So what we are doing is supporting them to create accommodation, shelter space for the people who are fleeing, because that's one of the most immediate needs. You need somewhere, a roof over your head, somewhere to sleep. So we've been distributing mattresses, blankets, sleeping mats, jerry cans, and so on to collective shelters, hosting displaced who are not able to find accommodation with friends and relatives. And there I want to emphasize that the very generous support that the government of China had provided to UNHCR in terms of core relief items. Some of these that we had in stock were among the first that were distributed to displaced people. And just last week, I had a visit to one of the collective shelters inside, together with the ambassador of China to Lebanon, and we saw firsthand how this aid was helping displaced people stay a bit more comfortable in the shelters.
Right. I mean, China has always been standing with, disaster-hit zones across much of the world. Now, how would you assess the humanitarian relief need versus the amount of need that is provided right now? What is the inadequacy right now?
It's far insufficient because it's a fifth of the population which is displaced from 14% of Lebanon's territory and trying to find somewhere to stay in communities that are already under pressure and strain. But the problem is that, as I mentioned, the Lebanese government has limited resources after years of deep economic crisis. But the humanitarian system, including UNHCR, is also under severe strain since the dramatic budget cuts in 2025. So the needs are huge, the resources limited, and as things are looking now, we don't see an end to the conflict at the moment, which means that those displaced are likely to remain displaced and more people may become displaced, like I mentioned, as a result of new areas becoming under attack or evacuation, which means that it's not just that immediate support that's needed, but it's also to think about longer term, because people who have not just left homes and belongings behind, but also jobs behind, cannot afford to pay for rent in the place they've been displaced to, buy new clothes, buy food, medicines, even older people arriving without wheelchairs and assistive devices. If they cannot afford this, that shock and grief may turn into frustration and anger and fuel tensions and instability. And this is one of our main concerns.
Karolina, you talk about psychological toll that is taking place, the trauma that people are experiencing, especially for the vulnerable, let's say the children who are departing from their homes, who get displaced. Under what condition are those children who are fleeing from their homes living under right now?
Yeah, about 35% of the displaced are children and who are now out of their normal, living environment, family environment, and school environment, and are now together with parents who are also highly traumatized and stressed and anxious about the insecure situation, but also the uncertain future. So we see a high degree of stress and trauma. What we're trying to support and respond to is to, in these collective shelters, together with Lebanese NGO partners, organize recreational activities for children so they can get an opportunity to play and enjoy and laugh and forget the grim reality that they are living in right now. And this is extremely important for their mental health and development.
I mean, it is heart-wrenching to even think about that. Now, let's talk about the inefficiencies. During the UN Geneva press briefing on March 9th, the UNHCR stated that its 2026 funding appeal was only 14% funded. Despite this, your team have managed in Lebanon to distribute over 168,000 core relief items to those in need. What does it mean for humanitarian operations when funding is this constrained? And how real is the risk of supplies running out?
I mean, thankfully, since that update, we have received pledges and contributions from a number of countries like France, the European Union, Sweden, Germany, and so on, in response to the Lebanon flash appeal that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres launched together with His Excellency the Prime Minister of Lebanon a couple of weeks ago. But still, we are at the moment 20% funded, while the needs are just rising, not reducing. So this practically means that people who are now becoming victims of this escalating conflict will not get the support they need to find a safe and dignified place to stay, that they may need to remain in schools that have turned into collective shelters where several families are sleeping on the floor in a classroom that should be providing education to children in different subjects and not hosting families on the floor. It may mean that you cannot cover medical expenses. It may mean that, for example, you're living very crammed, many families and people together in a small space. That can also increase risks of sexual violence and abuse and exploitation. These risks normally increase with time, and humanitarian assistance cannot, of course, stop the hostilities and conflict, but it can mitigate those risks of exploitation, abuse, and violence if people can support themselves and not become prey to people wanting to exploit their vulnerability.
Also, the public health concerns are mounting, given the conditions they're living under, I assume. Now, let's talk about the role of China. On March 17th, Chinese Foreign Ministry announced that China will provide emergency humanitarian relief to 4 countries in the region, including Lebanon, Iran, Jordan, and Iraq. This was described as an effort to alleviate the humanitarian sufferings faced by local populations. Karolina, how do you view the timeliness of this assistance, and what does it mean for your operation on the ground at this moment?
Well, as I mentioned, when the conflict in Lebanon escalated on the 2nd of March, we were fortunate to have a stock of core relief items in our warehouses. China had previously contributed with to UNHCR. So this enabled us to immediately respond that same morning that it started and people began fleeing from areas. So that was crucial. Additional support that the government of China has announced, I understand, will be for more relief items donated directly to the Lebanese government to support people. And this is very important. All support is needed, and timely support is really of the essence, because, we often say humanitarian assistance is only humanitarian if it arrives on time. If it arrives too late, it loses its value.
And how would you assess this current situation of the war? I guess UNHCR is no part of the war, of course. They're only at the receiving end. Now, what do you hope to say to those policymakers, who are starting wars and starting retaliations, so on and so forth?
Again, we deal with the civilian human consequences of wars and conflict. And what we see is that people, what they say to us, the displaced, is they say they want peace and they want to be able to return to their homes and put their kids back in the school and resume just their ordinary daily life. And I think this is what we are very much hoping for, that this will end as soon as possible, so that civilians who are bearing the brunt of it and can resume and go back to their peaceful lives, and their children can go back to school, both the children who are displaced, the children who are now giving up their classrooms to host displaced people, and that recovery and reconstruction can begin.
Thanks so much for all the admirable work to you and your team, and please do take care, Karolina.
Focus on what's relevant in China and the world. Bridge the gap between what you know and what you want to know. This is The Hub.
We've just heard from Lebanon, where more than 1 million people have been displaced. But inside Iran, the numbers are just as staggering. Nearly 3.2 million people displaced, tens of thousands of homes destroyed. How do you assist families when the front line is simply everywhere? I'm now joined by Salvador Gutierrez, who is the Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration inside Iran. Mr. Gutierrez, thank you so much for joining us. Can you please, first of all, start by telling us your living conditions? We've heard about threats targeting electricity grids, power stations. How's electricity? How's food and water? How's life there for you right now?
Well, we have been seeing different situations here in the country, right? We have seen, of course, all the concerns of the population. We have seen empty streets in the cities. We have seen people fleeing from the cities, and we have been seeing, of course, as you mentioned, some shortages of the electricity, of the water at some points. But very much the situation is in terms of public services stable at this moment. But what we have seen is, of course, the movement of large amounts of population, particularly to the northern areas of the country where they feel safer. And we have also been seeing some intra-city mobility because people is looking for zones of the different cities which are safer and which are better served.
Let's talk about the conflict itself. The conflict involving U.S., Iran, and Israel continues to spill over borders, affecting multiple countries. Much of the focus is now on refugees, but your organization, IOM, looks at human mobility more broadly. From this perspective, how would you describe the current mobility and displacement landscape inside Iran?
What we are seeing now is people living mostly here in urban cities, of course, including Iran, which has been already the most affected area. So people is living to the northern areas of the country, the northern provinces, where they find the zones are less impacted and where they can find, of course, also some family members. People is being hosted by their family members in all their provinces. We see large numbers of population going outside of the cities to rural areas, and we are also seeing people, as I mentioned, even relocating to other parts of the city. So far it's pretty much internal mobility, but of course people is quite concerned, and they are struggling a lot in order, to keep their jobs, to keep their property safe.
Now, since the escalation in early March, IOM, your organization, has recorded more than 1 million people displaced across the region, including over 130,000 crossing borders into neighboring countries. At the same time, more than 16 million people were already internally displaced even before this escalation. So what stands out to you about the scale and the patterns we're seeing right now?
Well, we need to clarify, of course, that we already had a very big mobility within the region before even the conflict occurred. So we already have large numbers of displaced population. And currently, the biggest displacement has occurred, as you already mentioned, in Lebanon. We have seen large amounts of IDPs, around 1 million there, of people that has been fleeing from targeted zones. And we also see, as I already described, a large mobility here in Tehran, in Iran also. So we see all this population that at the same time includes IDPs, includes refugees, includes migrants, includes stranded migrants that are also struggling a lot in order to keep safe and keep their income even. We have large amounts of workers that have been affected all around the region. This is basically the situation we have seen.
Well, I have a question for you, because how do you distinguish between refugees, migrants, and conflict-displaced populations? Or is this a fluid, a category where one category of people can easily transit into the next? How does all these frameworks assess impact your work?
A refugee is a category, is a recognized category, recognized by international law. A refugee is a person that is facing persecution in his or her country, and because of this fear of persecution, needs to go to another country. So that is clear. So we also have IDPs, internal displaced people, who basically is a group of people that has been affected and that needs to relocate, mostly internally within a country, right? And is facing, of course, all these fears and all these problems that provoke them to flee from even within the country. And we also have migrants. In our case, we have lots of stranded migrants, that even workers that were here and that were also affected by the crisis. So we have all this mix of groups, even in this very complex context like the one we are facing here in Iran.
And really, how does your organization, IOM, try to make an impact with all the data and information and on-the-ground observations that you have? How does interagency collaboration look like from your point of view?
Currently, we are providing assistance to different groups. We are providing assistance to Afghans that have been living here in Iran that have been affected by the current situation. We are also providing assistance to internal displaced people. I already mentioned these large numbers of people that we have been seeing here seeking protection in different parts of the cities and in different parts of the country. And we are also providing support to stranded migrants. I already referred these cases of migrant workers that have lost their jobs and that are now struggling to have access, even to food, to water. So we are providing this support. We are also providing psychosocial support to all these groups, and we are also supporting the response of the government to these different groups. We are monitoring also the flows of migrants and also of IDPs in order to see what are the humanitarian needs and where are they located, so that we can support them better. And we are also in close coordination with all the UN system in order to provide this humanitarian support that is deeply needed here in the country.
Salvador, Iran, like you said, hosts around a large number of Afghans, and according to our research, that is around 4.5 million, making Iran one of the largest migrant hosting countries in the world. So in the context of this current conflict, how are these existing migrant communities being impacted? Are we seeing the increased vulnerabilities or secondary movements among them?
We have an increase of the vulnerabilities of all the migrants, particularly the elderly, the children, the women. As I already mentioned, most of these migrants have already lost their jobs. They do not have this protection network. They don't have families here. So they are struggling to manage this situation, to face this situation. And in several cases, they are also concerned because many of these migrants are irregular migrants and they do not have access to all the services that the national population has. So they are struggling much more. They are facing more vulnerabilities, and at the same time, they have a reduced social network that can provide them with the support they need in order to address these needs that they have.
Now, how is IOM currently responding to this fluid situation? Are you scaling up emergency response, assisting those in need, mobility tracking, for example? And how is coordination with the local government working in reality?
Yes, we are coordinating with the government in order for us, together with the government, to assess the needs that the population has. We are also conducting these activities related to tracking the mobility and also monitoring how's the flow in the different borders of the country. We are also helping our partners in the humanitarian sector to understand what is the reality that is faced in the ground, what are the needs, and trying to help them to understand what will be the most strategic interventions to do here in the country to support the population. I already mentioned that we are providing direct support to migrants, to refugees, to IDPs, and also to stranded migrants. So we are here delivering on the ground and monitoring the situation and even calling all the different countries to support this humanitarian response, which is deeply needed in the country.
What would you say would happen if the United States escalates the war with Iran, despite President Trump claiming that the war is over soon? What if ground troops are in, escalations are materializing? How would that strain your line of work for you and your staffers?
Well, as I mentioned, we are monitoring the needs. We are monitoring what's the situation in the country. So far, what we have is internal mobility. We believe that if the situation escalates, this internal mobility might be even bigger. And of course, people might be in need also to move to other locations, perhaps even to other countries. We might be seeing some additional impacts in the economy of the country, and this will cause, of course, that the humanitarian needs will be even stronger, and the civilian population will suffer more. So our message is that we need to de-escalate the situation, and that we need to provide humanitarian assistance to all the populations that are in need in the country.
So if you have the chance to appeal to policymakers, what would you say to them at this point?
As I mentioned, our message is clear. We need to de-escalate the conflict. We join the Secretary General of the United Nations in this call to de-escalate the conflict, to reduce the violence, and to ensure the humanitarian assistance is provided, and that the humanitarian access is granted to all the humanitarian actors that are providing this support to the most vulnerable population in the country and in the region.
Salvador Gutierrez, Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration in Iran, thank you so much for your time, and please do take care. And that will do it for this edition of The Hub. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our news coverage continues on CGTN. Bye and take care.